Big Shaq walks into his own dealership, expecting respect, but instead the manager dismisses him as just another customer. In a world where power often hides behind polished glass, Big Shaq's silent observation ignites a reckoning that no one saw coming. A single misstep from the manager unleashes a truth so sharp, it doesn't just fire a man, it rewrites the rules of the entire game. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was a morning that promised ease, the sun hanging low over the suburban landscape like a painter's brush dipped in gold. Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as Big Shaq, cruised through the winding roads of his neighborhood in his sleek, jet-black SUV. The hum of the engine was a familiar comfort, a steady, grounding sound in a world that rarely gave him peace. From the outside, he was the epitome of success. Championship rings, philanthropic accolades, a booming business empire. But inside, there was an ache, a weight that pressed on his chest like the dense morning air. The streets were quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves stirred by the breeze, and the occasional bark of a dog. He waved at neighbors as he passed, their faces lighting up in recognition. Some shouted his name, calling out in admiration. He returned their waves with a practiced smile, but his mind was elsewhere. The city's contrasts had become sharper to him over the years. The manicured lawns of his neighborhood against the crumbling sidewalks of neighborhoods only a few miles away. The glaring lines of who belonged and who didn't. Lines that weren't drawn in concrete, but in glances, in small dismissals, in silence. He wasn't dressed for the public eye today. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just a plain white t-shirt, loose-fitting jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. His disguise wasn't meant to fool. It was a choice, a way to strip himself down to just the man, not the image. It was a test he liked to run from time to see the world as it really was, without the trappings of fame to shield him. His destination wasn't far. O'Neal Motors, the crown jewel of his business ventures. It was a gleaming structure of glass and chrome, a testament to ambition and the American dream. He hadn't been there in weeks, preferring to let his managers handle the day-to-day. But today, something had pulled him back. Maybe it was the restlessness that came with too many quiet mornings, or maybe it was the news stories he'd been reading. Subtle reports of rising tensions, of old prejudices finding new footholds. He felt it in the air, a shift that was hard to name, but impossible to ignore. As he turned onto the main boulevard, the sunlight caught the edges of his windshield, fracturing into a prism that played across the dashboard. He slowed at a crosswalk, watching a young boy in a faded hoodie jog across the street. The boy glanced up, eyes widening as he recognized Shaq behind the wheel. There was a moment of hesitation before the boy offered a shy wave. Shaq smiled and returned the gesture. The boy's grin bloomed wide as he continued on his way. Shaq's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That boy, he thought, reminded him of himself back before the NBA, before the endorsements and the cameras. Before he was Big Shaq, he was just Shaquille, a kid with big dreams in a world that didn't always make space for them. He wondered how many doors that boy would find closed to him, how many times he'd be told he didn't belong. The dealership came into view, its glass walls reflecting the clear sky like a mirror. Shaq eased the SUV into the lot, pulling into a space near the entrance. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching the scene unfold beyond the windshield. Salespeople in crisp suits darted between cars, their gestures sharp and efficient. Customers strolled the lot, some peering into windows, others deep in conversation. It was a well-oiled machine, or so it seemed. He stepped out, stretching his arms against the stiff morning air. The sun painted long shadows on the concrete beneath his feet. A few heads turned, but without the usual entourage, without the unmistakable Shaq swagger. He was just another man browsing for a car, and that suited him just fine. He walked slowly, taking in the familiar lines of the showroom, the glint of polished hoods, and the faint scent of leather and new tires. His name was on the building, but today he wasn't the CEO. He was a customer, an observer. He watched the staff move, the subtle hierarchy of who was greeted with a smile and who was passed by. A young couple in modest clothes lingered near the luxury models, their excitement evident, but the sales staff barely glanced their way. Shaq's jaw tightened. He could feel the old anger rising, the quiet, simmering frustration he'd learned to mask with charm and jokes. But today he let it sit there, a slow burn beneath the surface. He wasn't here to blow up. Not yet. He was here to see, to confirm the whispers that had been reaching him through the cracks in the corporate facade. He was here to decide if his empire had lost its soul. The manager, a tall man in an expensive suit, with a sharp haircut, caught Shaq's eye from across the lot. The man's gaze flicked over him. Quick, dismissive, the kind of look reserved for those deemed unimportant. Shaq tilted his head slightly, offering a nod, but the manager turned away, his attention already moving on to a pair of well-dressed clients, stepping out of a sleek sports car. Shaq's pulse quickened. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The unspoken test. Would he be seen? Would he be acknowledged? Not as a celebrity but as a man. A customer. A human being. The answer came in the form of a brusque nod from a young salesman, who approached half-heartedly, his smile thin and forced. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone more obligation than invitation. Shaq's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just looking," he said, his voice low but carrying weight. The salesman didn't press, stepping back as if relieved. Shaq continued to walk, the air around him thick with a tension he couldn't quite name. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharper shadows. The dealership glittered, a monument to success, but beneath the polish, cracks were showing. He could feel them, hairline fractures in the foundation. He wasn't sure what he'd find next, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't leaving until he had answers. Shaquille O'Neal stepped through the gleaming glass doors of O'Neal Motors, the midday sun spilling behind him like a silent witness. He felt the cool blast of air conditioning, as the showroom swallowed him in its sterile luxury. Chrome and glass shimmered under recessed lighting, high-end models gleaming beneath banners touting exclusivity and performance. He moved slowly, his broad shoulders casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. His outfit was plain: jeans, a soft gray t-shirt, a worn cap, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of being unseen. The staff glanced his way, their eyes brushing over him like dry wind. No recognition flickered, no nods of respect, no deferential greetings. Instead, they returned their focus to a trio of well-dressed clients who lounged near the espresso bar, sipping drinks and listening to a salesman's slick pitch about horsepower and custom interiors. Shaq's jaw tensed. He moved deeper into the showroom, his footsteps muted on the glossy floor, taking in the space he had once envisioned as a temple of innovation and inclusivity. A slender man in a sharp blue suit approached, his expression professionally bland. His name tag read Travis Colburn, though Shaq didn't need it. He recognized the cold set of Travis's jaw from reports, meetings, and brief introductions at corporate events. Travis's smile was thin, tight at the edges, as he appraised Shaq with a practiced glance that took in his casual clothes, his relaxed posture, and dismissed him entirely. "Can I help you?" Travis's voice was smooth, each word polished like a showroom floor, but his tone didn't invite conversation. It carried the same weight as a closed door. Shaq returned the smile, his lips curving up just slightly. "Just looking around," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a rumble beneath it, like distant thunder. "Well, if you're just browsing, we've got some brochures by the entrance." Travis's gaze flicked toward a corner table stacked with glossy pamphlets. "Or if you're interested in a pre-owned model, one of our junior associates can assist you. Our high-end inventories for serious buyers." His words were casual, but the implication was clear and sharp enough to cut. Shaq let the insult settle. He had spent his life navigating these moments, where a man's worth was measured by what he wore, how he spoke, or the color of his skin. His size and fame usually shielded him from such treatment, but today, stripped of the armor of status, he stood face to face with an old familiar barrier. He nodded slowly, as though considering the offer. "I think I'll take a look around myself," he said, his tone even, betraying none of the heat building in his chest. Travis's smile didn't waver, but his eyes cooled a fraction more. "Of course. Let me know if you need assistance," he said, already turning his attention to the next set of clients entering the showroom. Two men in tailored suits with the easy confidence of wealth. Shaq moved past him, letting the moment breathe. He wandered through the rows of cars, each gleaming machine a testament to engineering and excess. He ran his hand lightly over a polished hood, the cold metal smooth beneath his fingers. His reflection, distorted in the curve of chrome, stared back at him, familiar but distant. From his peripheral vision, he caught the subtle dance of staff members steering clear of him. Salesmen clustered near high-end models, offering bright smiles and firm handshakes to customers whose tailored clothes whispered money. Shaq watched them, his mind cataloging the slights, the assumptions, The careful curation of who was worth attention and who wasn't. A low voice caught his ear. A quiet exchange between two younger staff near the service desk.
Who's that guy?
Looks familiar. Probably just another tire kicker. Dressed like that? No way he's dropping cash here. The words stung more than he expected, threading through his ribs like cold wire. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his hands. This wasn't new. It was the same game he'd seen played in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, on city streets. The old rules, dressed up in new suits and polite smiles. A family caught his attention. A young black couple with a child, hesitating near a high-end SUV. Their eyes sparkled with excitement, but their voices were hushed, uncertain. They were dressed simply, like him. But the way the staff glanced their way with thin, dismissive smiles made Shaq's stomach twist. He watched as the couple tentatively approached one of the salesmen. The man's smile was practiced, his gestures professional, but his eyes flickered with the same calculation Travis had shown. The couple's questions were met with vague answers, and the salesman steered them gently but firmly toward the lower-end models. Shaq felt his hands curl into loose fists. Not today. Not here. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. This wasn't the time to confront it directly. Not yet. He needed to see how far the rot went. A subtle movement caught his eye. Travis, standing near the entrance, watching him from the corner of his eye, while chatting with another manager. Their conversation was low, but the glances they cast toward Shaq and the young couple spoke volumes. Shaq's pulse quickened, his mind working through scenarios. He could confront Travis now, call him out publicly. But that would only tip his hand too soon. Instead, he let the tension coil inside him like a spring. He would play the long game, the quiet observer waiting for the right moment to strike. He continued his slow circuit of the showroom, pausing near the young couple. He caught the husband's eye, offering a small nod. The man's posture straightened slightly, as though buoyed by the silent show of solidarity. Shaq's voice was low, calm as he leaned closer to examine the price tag on the SUV. "Nice choice," he murmured, just loud enough for the couple and the nearby salesman to hear. "That one's a beauty. Worth every penny." The salesman's face tightened, his smile straining at the edges. Shaq held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then turned away, continuing his walk as though nothing had passed between them. As he moved toward the back of the showroom, he felt Travis's gaze on his back. Cool, appraising, dismissive. Shaq's steps were deliberate, his pulse steady. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Shaquille O'Neal's footsteps echoed softly through the expansive showroom, his eyes drawn to the fine lines of chrome and the gleaming bodies of cars that reflected the morning light, like polished mirrors. Yet, beneath the quiet luxury, there was a pulse of tension, a silent hum he couldn't ignore. He felt it in the way the staff's eyes slid away from him, the stiff curve of polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, the quick shuffle of feet when he neared. He wasn't a stranger to these unspoken walls, but something about today felt different, thicker, heavier, as though the air itself was complicit in building those barriers. As he meandered between the high-end models, his ears caught fragments of a low conversation from the glass-walled office at the back of the showroom. He moved closer, pretending to examine a silver coupe, his posture casual but his senses sharp. Inside the office, Travis Colburn stood with two other managers, his voice smooth but laced with something colder, something that made Shaq's jaw tighten. "Look, I'm not saying we don't sell to everyone," Travis said, his words low but audible through the slight crack in the door. "But let's be real, people like that, they waste our time. They don't buy the top models, and they sure don't add to the prestige of the brand." His tone was smug, each word deliberate. "We've got to be selective. It's not about being rude. It's about business. You can't let just anyone walk in and bring down the value of this place." Shaq's breath slowed, his chest tightening as the weight of the words pressed against him. He'd heard variations of this speech before, in boardrooms where coded language wrapped ugly truths in business jargon, in whispered conversations that danced just on the edge of propriety. But hearing it here, in his own dealership, where the walls were meant to stand for opportunity and equality, sent a slow burn through his veins. Inside the office, one of the managers, a younger man with slicked back hair and an eager nod, chimed in. "Exactly. Those types don't buy. They're window shoppers, wasting everyone's time. We need to keep the floor clear for serious clients, the ones who can actually afford to buy." Travis chuckled, a sharp sound that scraped against Shaq's nerves. "Glad you're finally catching on. We can't be seen as soft. It's a business, not a charity. Shaq stepped back from the door, his pulse drumming in his ears. He felt the pressure of 1,000 moments like this, moments when silence felt like complicity, when stepping back felt like surrender. His hands curled into loose fists at his sides, the knuckles whitening against his skin. His first instinct was to storm in, to confront Travis and his cronies, to remind them with words and presence exactly whose name was on the building's facade. But he hesitated, the impulse cooling into something sharper, more controlled. There was power in patience. If he confronted them now, the story would end in bluster and damage control. A few apologies traded for headlines. But if he let them sink deeper into their own arrogance, if he gathered the weight of their own words and actions, the fallout could be far more devastating, and far more public. He drew a slow breath, forcing his hands to relax, his posture to soften. He continued his slow circuit of the showroom, his eyes calm but inwardly tracking every gesture, every conversation. The couple he'd noticed earlier was still nearby, their hopefulness slowly eroding, as the salesman continued to steer them toward lesser models. The man's shoulders drooped as his wife's smile faded. Shaq's heart twisted, the slow burn of frustration tightening in his chest. He recognized the weary resignation in their faces, the quiet calculation of whether to push back or quietly leave. He turned a corner and found himself near a cluster of customers gathered around a rare model, a high-performance car with a price tag that would make most people blanch. He listened as a young salesman lavished attention on them, his voice smooth and enthusiastic. The contrast between this display and the treatment he'd just witnessed was stark, and it fueled the storm building beneath Shaq's calm exterior. He lingered near the back of the showroom, his tall frame blending into the shadows. He could hear Travis's voice again, this time addressing one of the newer staff members near the service entrance. "Keep an eye on the floor," Travis said, his tone clipped. "If anyone starts getting too comfortable, especially the ones who don't look like they belong, steer them out. We can't afford to waste time on people who won't buy." The young staffer hesitated, his voice uncertain. "But what if they're actually interested?" Travis's response was a quiet laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Then they'll come back with a check. Trust me, you'll know the real buyers when you see them." Shaq's teeth ground together, the casual cruelty of the words, igniting a low, seething anger. But he held himself in check, forcing his breathing to steady, his face to remain neutral. This wasn't about rage. It was about strategy. He needed witnesses. He needed evidence. As he turned to leave the immediate area, his phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He stepped toward a quiet alcove near the elevators and checked the message. It was from Jamie Brooks, a junior employee he trusted, someone who had started as a lot attendant and risen through quiet determination and integrity. "Boss," the message read, "something's not right today. Need to talk. ASAP." Shaq's pulse quickened, his mind snapping into sharper focus. Jamie wasn't one to cry wolf. If he was reaching out, it meant the cracks in the dealership's foundation were wider than Shaq had suspected. He tucked the phone away and glanced back toward the office where Travis still held court, his laughter low and self-satisfied. Shaq's lips thinned into a hard line. He could feel the storm brewing around him, the currents of arrogance and prejudice swirling just beneath the surface of polished professionalism. The slow burn was no longer just heat. It was fuel. He would let them believe they were safe, let them bask in their false confidence. But when the moment came, when the trap was sprung, it wouldn't just be words in a back office. It would be a reckoning, and it would be public. With deliberate calm, Shaq turned back toward the showroom floor, his step silent but heavy with intent. The slow burn of revelation was almost complete. The firestorm was coming. Shaquille O'Neal stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the showroom, his reflection a silent specter against the glass. Outside, the sun cast long shadows over the parking lot, but inside the air was cold with control, thick with unspoken judgments. His eyes tracked the young black couple he'd noticed earlier, their hopeful expressions now fading beneath the weight of subtle humiliation. The man's hands were clasped too tightly behind his back, the woman's polite smile strained as the salesman, a wiry man with a condescending smirk, guided them from one car to another with practiced indifference. The salesman's tone grated. "Too loud, too dismissive. Well, maybe something more in your price range would be better. We don't want to waste your time on the higher-end models." His words hung in the air like a bad smell, turning heads that pretended not to hear, eyes that quickly looked away. Shaq's jaw tightened as a flicker of his own past being sized up, written off, dismissed, flashed in his mind. His patience, always vast, felt dangerously thin. He wasn't dressed in designer clothes today. He didn't wear the polished armor of fame. But here in this showroom with his name on the building, he wasn't invisible. He was something far more dangerous. He was watching. The couple's eyes met his for the briefest moment, and he saw in them the familiar mix of shame and resignation. The quiet calculation of whether to argue, to leave, or to swallow the insult. The woman murmured something to her partner, a barely audible "maybe we should just go," and the man's jaw clenched as he glanced at the cars one last time, his dreams turning to dust. Shaq's pulse ticked upward, a steady rhythm of frustration and purpose. He took a slow, deliberate breath and stepped forward, the weight of his steps pulling attention like a silent drumbeat. The salesman turned, his smirk still plastered across his face, only to falter when confronted by Shaq's towering frame. But Shaq said nothing to him, didn't spare him a glance. Instead, he addressed the couple directly, his voice low, warm, but carrying just enough force to cut through the tension. Looking at the LX9, he asked casually, nodding toward the sleek SUV the couple had been eyeing. The man hesitated, caught off guard by the interruption, but nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's our dream car. But it's probably out of reach." Shaq smiled softly, a knowing curve of his lips that spoke volumes. "It's a good choice," he said, stepping closer to the car. "Beautiful inside and out. I've driven one smooth as butter." He let the words hang for a beat, then turned to the salesman, his tone light but edged with quiet authority. "Hey, you mind getting the keys for a test drive? I'd like to see how it feels on the road." The salesman blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Of course, sir. But, no but." Shaq's voice was smooth, a soft command wrapped in velvet. "Just get the keys." The salesman hesitated, his eyes darting to Travis, who was busy schmoozing another client near the front. But Shaq's steady gaze brooked no argument, and after a moment, the salesman turned sharply and scurried toward the back offices. The couple exchanged a glance, the woman's brow furrowed in confusion. "I thank you," she said hesitantly, her voice low, "but we don't want to trouble you." "No trouble at all," Shaq said, his smile widening just slightly. "I believe everyone should get the chance to sit in their dream car. It's just a test drive." The keys arrived a few minutes later, and Shaq motioned for the couple to follow him. Outside, the sun painted the lot in gold, and the SUV gleamed under its touch. Shaq opened the driver's side door for the man, gesturing for him to climb in, while the woman slid into the passenger seat, her hands trembling slightly on the door handle. "Take it around the block," Shaq suggested, his voice gentle. "Feel what it's like to own it. You might be surprised." The man hesitated, his hands gripping the wheel, but the quiet encouragement in Shaq's voice pushed him past his doubt. He started the engine, the hum of it smoothing over their fears, and eased the car out of the lot with Shaq standing by. Watch. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one tightening the knot in Shaq's chest. When the SUV finally rolled back into the lot, the couple emerged with flushed cheeks and tentative smiles, the man's hand resting protectively on the woman's lower back. They looked different now, less defeated, more resolute. Shaq approached as they exited the car. "So how was it?" he asked, his tone easy, his posture relaxed. "It was incredible," the man said, a hint of wonder in his voice. We thought." Shaq held up a hand, cutting him off with a quiet laugh. "You thought it was out of reach. But dreams have a funny way of being closer than you think." He turned to the salesman, who had hovered awkwardly at a distance. "We'll take it," he said simply. The salesman's eyes widened. You're buying it?" he stammered. Shaq's smile was slow, deliberate. "Yes, I'm buying it. For them," he added, nodding toward the couple. The couple froze, disbelief painting their faces, the woman's hand flying to her mouth. "Wait, what?" she whispered. Shaq stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Consider it a gift," he said, "from someone who's seen too many dreams crushed by people like that guy." He nodded subtly toward Travis, who was obliviously laughing with another customer. The couple's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, their gratitude unspoken but loud in the tight clasp of their hands. They tried to protest, but Shaq shook his head. "Enjoy the ride," he said softly, then turned and walked away, his steps echoing against the glass walls of the showroom. As he moved toward the back of the dealership, the air behind him was charged, thick with stunned silence. He didn't look back. The clock was ticking louder now, And he knew the moment was near when words would no longer be whispered, when shadows would be dragged into the light. The time for silence was almost over. Shaq's broad silhouette cast a long shadow as he moved through the polished corridors of his own empire. The air hummed with the faint buzz of conversation and the soft tapping of keyboards in the background. But beneath the mundane noises, a silent storm was gathering. His steps were measured, deliberate, echoing against the marble floors, as if each footfall struck a countdown towards something inevitable. His mind churned, weighing strategies, balancing his instinct for confrontation against the power of timing. The smirks, the dismissals, the quiet snubs, they had pushed him to the edge of patience. But he wasn't a man who erupted. He was a man who calculated, who waited for the right moment to deliver a blow that would resonate far beyond these walls. He found Jamie Brooks by the service bay, a quiet figure in a dark shirt and khakis, clipboard in hand, diligently checking inventory against a delivery manifest. Jamie was one of the few staff members Shaq still trusted, a man who had worked his way up from the lot, who understood the silent hierarchies that thrived in places like this. Shaq approached with a slow nod, and Jamie glanced up, his face registering mild surprise before settling into polite acknowledgement. "Hey there," Jamie said, offering a quick smile. "Need a hand with something?" His tone was respectful but cautious, the way a lower-level employee might address a stranger in their boss's building. Shaq leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to signal the need for discretion. "I'm not just browsing," he said, a quiet authority threading through his tone. "I'm Shaquille O'Neal." Jamie's brow furrowed for a moment, confusion flickering behind his eyes as he glanced Shaq up and down. The casual attire, the low cap. Then realization dawned like a sunrise, his mouth falling open slightly, his clipboard lowering as his posture straightened. "Wait, seriously?" he murmured, voice low but taut with disbelief. Shaq nodded, a wry twist to his mouth.
"Yeah."
"I came in low-key to see how things are running. What I've seen isn't pretty, Jamie. Not pretty at all." Jamie's face tightened, and he glanced around before taking a cautious step closer. "You mean the way they're treating people? I've noticed it too. It's been getting worse. Travis, he's got this idea about selective clientele, and it's not just about money. It's about who he thinks should be here." Shaq's jaw flexed, a muscle ticking as his gaze flicked toward the gleaming showroom beyond, where Travis was still laughing with customers he deemed worthy. "Exactly," Shaq said quietly. "And it ends today, but I can't do this alone." Jamie hesitated, glancing again toward the front before leaning in closer. "What do you need me to do?" Shaq's voice dropped even lower, his tone calm but edged with steel. "I need you to gather everyone. Staff, customers, anyone who will listen. I'm going to expose what's been happening here, and it needs to be public. I want them all to see how this place really operates when no one's watching." Jamie swallowed hard, his gaze darting nervously. "That's gonna cause a scene. Travis won't take that lightly." "That's the point," Shaq replied, his voice dark and even. "They need to see who he is. They need to see the real cost of his arrogance." Jamie's lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of determination sparking in his eyes. "All right, I'll help. I'll get the word around quietly. Tell people there's going to be an announcement. But we've got to move fast. Travis is always on edge. He'll smell something if we wait too long." Shaq nodded, his pulse steady as a drumbeat. "Go. Start now." Jamie turned sharply, moving with purpose, his steps quiet but quick as he slipped through the service bay and disappeared into the heart of the dealership. Shaq watched him go, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He turned back toward the main floor, his tall frame blending briefly into the flow of customers and staff, an unseen force poised for revelation. The air in the showroom thickened, the buzz of conversation rising and falling like waves against an unseen shore. Shaq positioned himself near a gleaming SUV, watching as Jamie whispered quietly to staff, nodding subtly toward Shaq, signaling the impending announcement. The tension built slowly, a coil winding tighter with each passing minute, as more eyes turned his way, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Travis, oblivious to the brewing storm, continued his smooth patter with a high-profile client near the front, gesturing grandly toward a custom coupe. His laughter rang out, sharp and dismissive, the sound of a man confident in his dominion. But the laughter faltered as he noticed the shift in the room, the subtle drawing of attention, the quiet murmur of voices threading through the air. "What's going on?" Travis's voice cut through the tension, his gaze narrowing as he scanned the showroom. Shaq stepped forward, his posture straight, his voice calm but commanding. "I think it's time everyone heard the truth," he said, his words carrying effortlessly over the rising murmur. Travis's face twisted, the confident smirk evaporating into a scowl. "Excuse me? Who the hell do you think you are, making announcements in my dealership?" Shaq's lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile. "I'm Shaquille O'Neal. This is my dealership, and it's time everyone here knows exactly how you've been running it." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd, the realization dawning, like a thunderclap. Faces turned toward Shaq, recognition flickering through their expressions, whispers rising as his name spread like wildfire. The moment crystallized, a fragile hush descending as Travis paled, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Shaq's voice remained calm, each word precise and deliberate. "I've seen how you treat customers, how you decide who's worth your time, and who isn't. How you've humiliated good people, just because they didn't fit your idea of what a buyer should look like. It ends today." Travis's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. "You can't just come in here." "I can," Shaq interrupted, his tone like steel wrapped in silk. "And I will." The silence deepened, the weight of Shaq's words settling over the room like a heavy, undeniable truth. In that instant, the facade cracked, and the true nature of the dealership, the hidden prejudices, the quiet dismissals, was laid bare for all to see. Jamie moved swiftly through the corridors of the dealership, his steps purposeful but not hurried, his face a mask of polite professionalism. The hum of conversation around him rose and fell, unaware of the quiet storm building beneath the showroom's polished surface. His eyes darted discreetly toward key staff, offering quick nods, quiet gestures, each one a silent signal. A whispered comment here, a subtle glance there, and the plan that he and Shaq had concocted only minutes ago was set into motion. In the center of the showroom, Travis Colburn sensed the shift, though he couldn't yet name it. His posture stiffened as he cut his conversation with a high-value client short, his eyes scanning the floor with sharp calculation. Something was off. The normal rhythm of the showroom, the seamless dance of sales pitches and transactions, had faltered. Whispers flitted like shadows at the edges of his vision, heads turning not toward the gleaming cars, but toward quiet murmurs and sidelong glances. He approached one of the junior associates, his voice low and clipped. "What's going on? Why is everyone standing around?" the young man stammered, glancing nervously toward the back where Jamie was slipping into another conversation. I'm not sure, sir." Jamie said, "There's an announcement coming. Something about new procedures?" Travis's brow furrowed, his mouth tightening into a thin line. "Announcement? What announcement?" The tension in his voice caught the attention of nearby customers, their conversations pausing as curiosity rippled outward. Travis straightened his jacket, smoothing invisible creases, his mind racing through possibilities. He hadn't authorized any announcements. His grip on the floor's control was slipping, and the realization was like sand trickling through his fingers. Meanwhile, Jamie continued his quiet work, approaching customers with a smile that masked urgency. "We'll be having a brief announcement from corporate in a few minutes," he said softly, each word carefully chosen. "Please feel free to stay by the main display. It's important." Some nodded, intrigued by the sudden shift in the day's routine. A few murmured to one another, speculating about promotions or product launches. Others, sensing the undercurrent of tension, exchanged uncertain glances, but stayed, curiosity holding them in place. Shaq remained by the display of the high-end model he'd quietly purchased for the young couple earlier. His tall frame was calm, his eyes steady as he watched the room shift around him. His heartbeat was steady, the storm inside him now a controlled fire. He saw Travis pacing near the front, his gestures sharp, his voice raised slightly as he tried to reassert control over the staff. But his words fell flat against the growing murmur of voices. Travis barked at one of the senior salesmen, a man named Darren, with salt and pepper hair and a tired expression. "Shut this down," he hissed. "Find out what Jamie's doing and stop it. Now." Darren hesitated, glancing toward the gathering crowd, and then back at Travis. "It's too late," he said quietly. "People are expecting something. You can't just sweep it away now without making it worse." Travis's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding, as frustration twisted his features. "I'll handle this myself," he snapped, stalking across the floor toward the main display, his voice rising. "Attention everyone. There's been a mistake. Whatever you've heard." His words were cut off by Jamie, who had stepped into position near the display with a calm professionalism that belied the tension beneath his composed expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamie's voice carried over the room, strong and clear, drawing the attention of staff and customers alike. "We're about to have a special announcement from Mr. Shaquille O'Neal himself. Please stay with us for a few moments." Travis froze mid-step, his face draining of color, as realization crashed over him. His eyes snapped to Shaq, who was now stepping forward, his presence undeniable, his calm expression drawing every eye in the room. Shaq's voice was low but carried like a bell, resonant and measured. "Thank you all for being here today," he said, his gaze sweeping over the gathering crowd. "I know this isn't what you expected when you walked into this dealership, but it's something that needs to be said, and it needs to be said now." Travis's mouth opened, his protest strangled by the weight of Shaq's words. The authority in his voice left no room for interruption, no space for the smooth excuses Travis had relied on for years. Customers leaned in, staff members edged closer, the entire room pulled taut with anticipation. Jamie stepped back, his work done, his eyes meeting Shaq's in a brief nod of solidarity. The trap was set, the stage prepared. Shaq was in command now, and there was no going back. As the air thickened with anticipation, Travis stood paralyzed at the edge of the crowd, his world unraveling in front of his eyes. His usual arrogance faltered, his practiced control slipping through the cracks. The whispers grew louder, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on every corner of the showroom. Shaq took another step forward, the light from the high windows casting a halo around him, as he prepared to speak the words that would tear down the careful facade Travis had built. The trap had been sprung, and the silence that followed was not empty but filled with the sharp, electric tension of a truth about to be revealed. The moment cracked like the snap of a high-tension cable, as Shaq stepped forward, his tailored suit cutting a sharp, commanding silhouette against the glossy backdrop of the showroom. The murmur of voices that had ebbed and flowed all morning fell away, leaving a silence so deep it was almost physical. Travis, caught mid-motion with his mouth still half open, froze where he stood near the luxury display. Customers and employees alike stood suspended, the weight of anticipation pressing down on every shoulder. The bright overhead lights painted everything in stark clarity, but it was Shaq's presence, his quiet, undeniable authority, that truly illuminated the space. Shaq's voice rang out, low and resonant, carrying a calm that rippled through the room. "My name is Shaquille O'Neal," he said, each syllable measured and deliberate. "Most of you know me from the courts, from the commercials, maybe from the community work. But what you might not know is that I own this place, O'Neal Motors, and today I came here not as a CEO, not as a celebrity, but as a customer, as a man." A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd, like a breeze stirring tall grass. Faces that had been blank with confusion now shifted, eyes widening as whispers spread. People exchanged glances, the realization settling in layers. Travis's face drained of its arrogant flush, his jaw tightening as if bracing against a blow he couldn't see. Shaq let the silence stretch just a beat longer, grounding himself in the gravity of the moment. His hands were relaxed at his sides, his posture straight but unthreatening, his voice steady. "I walked through this dealership today in plain clothes," he continued, "because I wanted to see how people here are treated when they're not recognized, when they don't come in flashing wealth or status. And what I saw was not the company I built." The air thickened, breaths held as Shaq's words echoed through the space. Some of the staff shifted uncomfortably, while others stood frozen, guilt and fear flickering behind their professional masks. Travis's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "I saw dismissive glances, overheard ugly words," Shaq said, his tone deepening with restrained emotion. "I saw a young couple humiliated because of how they looked, steered away from their dreams because someone decided they didn't belong. I heard a manager," his gaze landed squarely on Travis, sharp and unwavering, bragging about refusing service to people he deemed unworthy. Not because they couldn't pay, but because of assumptions about who they were. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Some customers looked away, others stared directly at Travis, their expressions hardening. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, some shrinking back, others stiffening with defensiveness. "I built this dealership," Shaq continued, his voice gathering strength, "on the belief that everyone deserves respect, that success isn't about exclusion, but inclusion, that we lift each other up, not push each other down. Today I saw that vision betrayed, and it stops now." Travis tried to recover, his voice cracking as he stepped forward. This is a misunderstanding, Mr. O'Neal. I can explain. Shaq's gaze pinned him in place, a silent command that brooked no interruption. No, Travis. You can't explain away arrogance. You can't excuse prejudice. Not in my house. The finality of the words rang like a gavel striking, and for a moment, the room was utterly still. Shaq took a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing just slightly, as he shifted his gaze away from Travis to address the room. This isn't just about one man's actions, he said. It's about a culture that allows these things to happen, a culture we're going to change, starting today. A murmur of agreement rose, tentative at first, then swelling as customers and staff found their voices. One customer, a middle-aged woman in a smart blazer, crossed her arms and nodded sharply. It's about time, she said, her voice carrying across the space. Others echoed her sentiment, the hum of collective realization filling the air. Travis's posture sagged as the weight of the room turned against him. His earlier confidence had withered, leaving behind a man stripped of the power he had wielded so carelessly. He looked around, searching for support, but found only a widening gulf of silence and judgment. Shaq's tone softened, the weight of his disappointment evident. We all have a choice in how we treat others, he said. Whether we extend a hand or turn our backs, whether we lift someone up or push them down. This dealership was meant to be a place where dreams were built, not broken. That's the legacy I want. That's the standard I expect. His words settled over the room like a blanket, heavy but warm, wrapping everyone in a shared understanding. Faces that had been wary now reflected something deeper, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a truth too long ignored. Jamie Brooks stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his expression sober but steady. Mr. O'Neal, he said quietly, what do you want us to do? Shaq turned to him, his gaze steady. We rebuild, he said simply. We start with accountability. Travis's actions are inexcusable, and he's done here. But it doesn't stop with him. We change the way we operate. From the ground up, no more hidden biases, no more silence. If we're going to be a beacon for the community, we have to earn it. A hush fell, the finality of his words reverberating through the room. Shaq stepped back, allowing the silence to expand, to settle. He met the eyes of the young couple he'd helped earlier, offering them a nod of quiet reassurance. The woman's eyes shimmered with unspoken gratitude, her partner's posture straightening with renewed dignity. Travis, pale and defeated, opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came. He turned on his heel and stalked toward the office, his steps heavy and hollow against the floor. No one followed. Shaq exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He scanned the room one last time, the weight of the moment sinking in. The confrontation was over, but the real work was just beginning. The echo of Shaq's last words still hung in the air when the glass doors of the showroom parted with a soft, deliberate swish. Heads turned instinctively, as a group of sharply dressed individuals strode into the dealership. At their center was a woman in her early 40s, her tailored charcoal gray suit sharp against the polished chrome surroundings. Her hair was slicked back into a severe bun, her gaze cool and assessing, and her very presence caused the room's already tense atmosphere to tighten another notch. Riley Carter, the board's steeliest executive, the enforcer behind the scenes, and a woman whose word could flip empires. Shaq recognized her immediately, their paths having crossed in corporate strategy meetings. He saw the faintest flicker of a nod in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken alliance they were about to solidify. Behind her, 2 other board members followed, their expressions unreadable but their presence adding undeniable weight to the moment. Riley's heels clicked decisively across the marble floor as she approached the center of the showroom. Travis, sensing a shift he hadn't prepared for, straightened from where he had been standing, his face contorting in an attempt to regain composure. Riley, he greeted, forcing a smile that failed to meet his eyes. I wasn't expecting the board to visit today. That's clear, Riley said, her tone clipped, her voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. Her gaze swept over the gathering of customers and staff, noting the tension, the quiet muttering, the sideways glances of unease. We've been monitoring this location for some time, Travis. Today just happened to be the perfect opportunity to bring clarity. Travis's smile faltered, a flicker of something panicked passing through his eyes. I can explain, he began, his voice cracking slightly, but Riley raised a single imperious hand, silencing him. You've already explained enough with your actions, she said coldly. And Shaqille's presence today has merely confirmed what we suspected. She turned briefly toward Shaq, her expression professional but tinged with genuine appreciation. Thank you, Mr. O'Neal, for your discretion and your integrity. It's unfortunate it had to come to this, but your actions have provided us with the evidence we needed. Travis's face drained of color, his shoulders sagging as the realization set in. His eyes flicked around the showroom, as though searching for allies, but found none. Even his most loyal staff had melted into the background, unwilling to catch his gaze. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words, the collective recognition of a downfall no one could or would stop. You're making a mistake, Travis said, his voice rising, desperate now. I've built this dealership's reputation, increased sales, cultivated the kind of clientele this place deserves. You're throwing that all away on a misunderstanding, on hearsay. Riley's lips tightened into a thin, unyielding line. What we're throwing away, she said icily, is a culture of exclusion, arrogance, and unethical behavior. The very foundation you claim to build this dealership on is exactly what we're dismantling. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties. Security will escort you off the premises. Your access is revoked, and your severance will be reviewed pending further investigation. A collective murmur rippled through the room, the sound sharp and inevitable. Travis's face contorted, disbelief and rage twisting his features into something almost unrecognizable. You can't do this, he hissed, taking an angry step toward Riley. But two of the dealership's internal security personnel appeared at his sides, their presence silent but unmistakably firm. His protests faltered as the reality of his downfall descended. Shaq watched the scene unfold, his expression a mask of quiet resolve. He felt no triumph in Travis's collapse, only a deep, weary sense of justice being served. There was no gloating in his stance, no smirk of satisfaction, just the understanding that this was a necessary purge, a long overdue reckoning. Travis's removal wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had ever felt invisible under his rule. Riley turned back to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying authority and finality. To the staff and valued customers here today, I want to make it clear that this dealership's values are being reaffirmed, starting now. Mr. O'Neal's leadership will continue to guide this company, and we will be instituting comprehensive changes to ensure that respect, inclusivity, and fairness are not just words we display, but principles we live by. A soft wave of approval rolled through the crowd, some customers nodding in agreement, staff exchanging glances of cautious optimism. The oppressive weight that had clung to the dealership's atmosphere all day seemed to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of hope. Travis, his face pale and drawn, was quietly escorted toward the exit. His steps were heavy, his shoulders slumped, his protest reduced to bitter murmurs that no one cared to hear. He paused briefly at the threshold, casting one last venomous glance back toward Shaq. But the look didn't land. Shaq's gaze was steady, his posture unshaken, his focus already shifted beyond this moment to what would come next. As the glass doors closed behind Travis, a collective exhale rippled through the showroom. Riley stepped closer to Shaq, her voice dropping just enough for only him to hear. We've been watching him for months, she admitted, her tone cool but edged with a quiet satisfaction. Your actions today gave us the public proof we needed to remove him without contest. This won't just resonate here, it'll send a message across the entire chain. Shaq nodded slowly, his thoughts already racing ahead. Good, he said quietly. It's time to rebuild. Time to show everyone what we really stand for. Riley's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Exactly, she said. Let's get to work. The crowd gradually began to disperse, the tension dissolving into a buzz of conversation and quiet relief. Shaq stood for a moment longer, watching the showroom transform from a battleground into a space of possibility. Then, with a quiet breath, he turned toward Jamie, who stood waiting nearby. Together they stepped forward into the next chapter. The echo of Travis's fall had barely settled before the ripples began to spread. By the next morning, headlines blazed across local news channels and social media feeds. CEO Shaquille O'Neal exposes discrimination in his own dealership, racism and classism in high-end car sales, and Big Shaq's stand sparks industry-wide reflection. The story wasn't just about a disgraced manager. It was about a deep, festering wound in the way business had long been conducted. News anchors debated the implications with feigned neutrality, while commentators dissected every angle, voices rising over each other in a cacophony of outrage, admiration, and cynicism. Shaq sat in his home office, the light from the large windows throwing elongated shadows across his desk. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from reporters, colleagues, and old friends, some offering congratulations, others offering thinly veiled advice to tread carefully. He scrolled past them, focusing instead on the quiet text from Jamie. The staff's relieved. People are finally talking. Thank you. That simple message grounded him more than any headline or public praise could. It reminded him that behind every story were real people, people whose lives were shaped by moments like this. He turned to his laptop, opening a draft of a statement his foundation had prepared. The words were precise, powerful, but controlled. This isn't about one man's actions. It's about creating a culture of respect and equality. It's about ensuring that every customer and employee feels valued, regardless of background or status. We are committed to lasting change. He read it twice, feeling the weight of each sentence, then made subtle edits, sharpening the message without turning it into a victory lap. There was no triumph in exposing ugliness. There was only responsibility, the responsibility to push forward. Outside, the city stirred with a mix of admiration and unease. Protesters gathered in front of O'Neal Motors, some holding signs supporting Shaq's stance, others demanding accountability from the broader industry. A group of rival dealership executives convened quietly, their conversations tinged with worry. Some were already drafting policies, not out of conviction, but from fear of being the next to fall under scrutiny. Shaq's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Riley Carter. He answered, her voice crisp and measured on the line. It's moving faster than we expected, she said without preamble. We've been contacted by other branches, even competitors. They're scrambling to manage the fallout. They're afraid of what this could mean for them. That's the point, Shaq replied, his tone steady. This isn't about damage control. It's about forcing a real change. Riley hesitated. There's talk of pushback. Some in the industry are calling this a PR stunt. Others are saying you're overstepping, stirring unnecessary trouble. Shaq's jaw tightened, his voice dropping low and certain. Let them talk. This isn't for them. This is for the people who get ignored, who get dismissed, the ones who get humiliated just for walking through a door. This is for them. Riley exhaled quietly. I'll keep you updated. Just be prepared. This is only the beginning. As the call ended, Shaq leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He could feel the storm clouds gathering, whispers of lawsuits, quiet threats from industry giants who didn't appreciate being dragged into the spotlight. But fear wasn't new to him. He'd faced it on the court, in boardrooms, and in the glare of public scrutiny. What mattered now wasn't the noise. It was the impact. He had a platform, and he intended to use it. His thoughts drifted to the young couple at the dealership, to Jamie, to every unseen person who had ever been dismissed by a sharp-suited gatekeeper like Travis. They were the reason he couldn't stop now. His foundation's work would have to double down. Community initiatives, scholarships, mentorship programs, all aimed at breaking the cycles of exclusion that thrived in silence. The next morning, he stood on the steps of the dealership, surrounded by press cameras and flashing lights. His tailored suit was impeccable, but his expression was clear-eyed and serious. This isn't a press event, he began, his voice firm but calm. This is a call to action. We're not here to point fingers. We're here to build a future where respect isn't selective, where opportunity isn't conditional. We're starting here, but we're not stopping here. As he spoke, he felt the shifting tide beneath his words. Some faces in the crowd were skeptical, others visibly moved. He could sense the quiet resistance simmering just out of sight, those who feared change more than injustice. But he also saw determination in the eyes of the staff behind him, in the quiet nods of customers who had come back not to buy, but to support a stand they recognized as their own. When the cameras stopped rolling, Shaq didn't retreat. He stayed, shaking hands, listening to stories, offering reassurances. He knew this wasn't over. The threats would come, the pushback would build, but so would the movement. The ripple effect had begun, and while it was spreading fast, it was also deepening. This wasn't just about one dealership or one industry. It was about rewriting the silent rules that had governed too many places for too long. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the lot, Shaq stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the weight of what was unfolding. He wasn't just fighting for a building with his name on it. He was fighting for dignity, for respect, for a world where the unseen became seen. And as the shadows lengthened and the city lights blinked to life, he knew one thing for certain: the real battle was just beginning. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden light that stretched long fingers across the city's concrete sprawl. Shaq eased his SUV into a steady rhythm along the downtown streets. The engines purr, a low counterpoint to his thoughts. The events of the day replayed in fragments: Travis's downfall, the public reckoning, the flood of headlines. But beyond the headlines was the deeper, quieter understanding that change, real change, wasn't a moment. It was a movement, a commitment, a weight that didn't lift with applause or fade with the next news cycle. It was something he'd carry forward, not just as a businessman, but as a man. He glanced at the passing cityscape, the neon lights flickering to life, the silhouettes of office towers against the sky, the hum of life resuming its usual pace. Yet for Shaq, nothing felt usual. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel, a subtle clenching that echoed the slow burn still simmering beneath his calm exterior. He thought of the young couple driving home in their new SUV, of Jamie standing taller today than he had yesterday, of Riley Carter's sharp nod confirming a silent pact. These weren't victories to celebrate, they were reminders of the work left to do. The SUV's dashboard display blinked with a new message. Shaq's brow furrowed as he tapped the screen, pulling up a simple notification. New message from unknown sender. His pulse quickened, the faintest tingle of unease threading through the quiet. He found a side street and pulled over, shifting the car into park before opening the message. It was brief, just a few lines of text that cut through the polished veneer of the day's events. Thought you should know Travis wasn't acting alone. There are deeper pockets and bigger players involved. This goes way beyond your dealership. If you want to know more, I can show you. Shaq read the message twice, his jaw tightening as the implications sank in. The sender hadn't signed their name, but something about the phrasing, sharp, informed, deliberate, suggested someone on the inside, someone who had seen too much and had stayed silent for too long. His mind raced with possibilities, weighing trust against risk, curiosity against caution. There was a part of him, a large part, that wanted to dismiss it as the last gasp of a disgraced man's cronies. But he'd learned too much today to ignore the undercurrents beneath the surface. He leaned back in the driver's seat, staring out at the city that shimmered with the promise of progress and the weight of hidden truths. The message wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation, a glimpse into a deeper layer of corruption, one that extended beyond O'Neal Motors and into the wider, murkier world of business and influence. And now, whether he wanted to or not, he was part of it. Shaq exhaled slowly, the breath heavy with the understanding that this wasn't over. His role as a leader, a father, a symbol of resilience, it all demanded more than a single confrontation. It demanded vigilance, persistence, and the willingness to face truths that others would prefer to keep buried. He wasn't just responsible for the people who worked under his name, he was responsible for the example he set, for the message he sent to every young person watching. As he pulled back onto the street, the weight of the message sat heavy in his pocket. The city rolled past in streaks of light and shadow, but his thoughts were fixed firmly ahead. He thought of his own children, of the stories they would hear about him, of the lessons they would carry forward. He wanted them to know that standing for what was right wasn't a grand gesture. It was a series of choices, some loud and public, others quiet and internal. It was about showing up, about using the power you had to protect those without it. A soft vibration from his phone signaled another message. This one was from Riley. "We're with you. Let's take this all the way." Her words, succinct but powerful, echoed in his mind as he drove through the deepening twilight. The path ahead wasn't clear, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was necessary. He had made a stand, and now the ripples from that decision were widening into waves. As the city's lights blurred into a tapestry of possibility and threat, Shaq's lips pressed into a thin line, his resolve hardening. This was no longer about a dealership, a manager, or even a single injustice. It was about the system, about the quiet, insidious rot that spread beneath the surface of success. And now that he'd seen it, he couldn't unsee it. He couldn't pretend it wasn't there. The SUV's headlights cut a path through the encroaching dark. As he turned toward home, his mind already sketching the outlines of the next battle, the message from the unknown sender lingered in his thoughts, a quiet reminder that the fight was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. But he wasn't stepping back. Not now, not ever. As the city hummed around him, alive with stories yet to be told, Shaquille O'Neal pressed forward into the night, his legacy in motion, his next move already taking shape in the shadows. The story's just begun, and the shadows run deeper than anyone imagined. Stay close as we peel back the layers of power, deception, and justice. This isn't just Shaq's story, it's a mirror to the world we all live in. Are you ready to see what's behind the next door?